Good evening and welcome to season 2 episode of Backwoods Investigations. I am your host Blimp, team leader for the Southern Illinois Monster Hunters team. And tonight, with my special guest all the way from Heron, Illinois, my own cousin, Big Country, Kyle Nation is in, a member of the Southern Illinois Monster Hunters team. We're going to be talking tonight about our camping expedition that happened in 2016. His encounter with what he believes to be a Bigfoot, what we found on that camp out, his theories, and more. Thanks for coming on the show tonight, Kyle. I appreciate it, cuz.
Uh, it's not that big of a deal. I'm more than willing to talk anytime. I like listening to your show and hearing everybody's stories, and I'm glad to be on here and able to tell mine.
Well, it's a big thing. You're you're the first person ever from the team to come on and share their testimony, and you and me, we've been on a couple at one adventure, and it was a 2 day, 3 day, 2 night camp out, and I'll tell you, a lot can happen in 3 days and 2 nights. You can agree with me on that.
Oh, yeah.
So let's get right down to business, Kyle. Go ahead and tell. I know who you are, but our viewers don't know who you are. So go ahead and give us a rundown on who you are, bud.
Well, as you all know, my name is Kyle Nation. I live in Heron, Illinois. I hadn't really made much thought about the whole Bigfoot deal until around 2016. I had Zach get a hold of me and asked if I wanted to go on a little research trip. I was like, well, sure. I've always thought about it. I just never put the effort to go and do it. So we went out there and we did some investigating, and some of the things that we found and heard and saw were extraordinary. I'll never forget what we heard and saw.
So like you said, and I'll agree with you. It was a eventful trip that we had. I mean, it was a short notice camping expedition that I planned. It was only 2 weeks prior, and I had the bright idea to do it. And I do thank you for coming out, though. But let's go down the list. Leading up to the expedition, what was going through your head?
Well, originally it was just that I get to hang out with the cousin. I wasn't expecting anything from it, not very much, but once I got down there and then you started teaching me a lot of things, and then I realized, this stuff should be taken seriously. So I did take it seriously, and I listened to what you said, and I've done my research, and whenever things moved along through camp, that's whenever I started realizing that this could be a more serious thing than what I'm perceiving it to be.
And going into camp, I mean, you were there. They've heard me talk about camp, but them and me want to hear what it was going into camp, setting up camp, during everything. What was it like through your eyes, Kyle?
Well, whenever we were going and setting up camp, it reminded me of the good old days whenever I was back living on the farm, helping out, getting everything set up on the tractor and helping out with my grandpa and things like that. It brought back good memories. And then whenever we got down there, it reminded me of, old camping trips because, we had to set up our tents and things like that, get the fire going, make sure everything was secure, things like that. Brought back good memories, made me feel good.
And leading up to the expedition, the camp out, and in your encounter, where would you say you was in whenever it comes to Bigfoot leading up to your encounter?
Well, I've always thought that there were more unexplainable things out in the world. I've never said that there wasn't a such thing as Bigfoot, but I wasn't a huge believer whenever I was going into camp. But my experiences through our expedition and our research and things like that definitely led me to believe that there could be or was a such thing as Bigfoot out in those woods.
And you can tell the viewers here it's prime habitat for anything. I mean, you've seen where we had deer, we heard owls, we heard coons, we heard a little bit of everything the first night in camp.
Oh yeah.
And like whenever the owls started going off, that was the whenever I looked at you and I told you that there's something in the woods, they're sounding off an alarm.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
But let's get down to it. First night of camp. Give everybody a rundown on what happened, and I'll give my end of it.
Oh, I think first night we went trekking through the woods to see if we could bring anything out. I'm pretty sure. And then whenever we got done with that, we started our hike back to base camp, and we took shifts leading up into the night. I think you had first shift, and then I had last shift.
Mm-hmm.
And then I don't think there wasn't anything special the first night. I think it was the second night everything started happening.
It was, and then I remember being out about maybe 500 yards from camp. I was on the far end of that the knob we was on the east side. You were on the west side at base camp up by the road, and I went and I remember radioing back to you and saying, "I'm on my way back. Get the field kit. We've got a print."
Oh yes, I remember that.
And whenever I called back to you and I told you, "Hey, we got a print," what was going through your head?
All I really wanted to do was just go ahead and get everything done specifically how you told me to do it. That was exactly what was running through my head. I was taking orders exactly how they were supposed to be done, and I was just waiting for you to get back as soon as possible. Well, I was a little scared, but that was all.
And
I was just ready to take orders.
And not only that, when you first saw the print we found and we started taking the measurements of it, what was going through your head?
That's a big ass foot.
That's exactly my idea how it was. I mean, if I'm remembering this right, that print that you and me found was, I think about 18 inches long, about 8 inches wide.
Yeah.
And I mean, it was wide, and that was just across the top of the foot.
Yeah.
And then we continued our adventure from there and doing our night hunt. And I think
we also find some hair samples too near the footprint.
Yeah, it was just maybe about 50 yards down the hill.
Yeah.
We found the black and gray and whitish hair on that break.
Yeah.
And I mean, we must have covered about 3 miles that night on foot.
Yeah, it was something like that.
Because we were out for about 3 hours.
Yeah, it was like 3.5 hours, and then whenever we thought that we were done with the whole research deal, at night, then we went back to base camp and went to bed. The next mornings, whenever we found things out, we found fallen trees where something big had been pushing down big old tree branches and things like that.
Right. Like you said, both nights we took a shift each, and I took first shift that night, watching camp where we was doing 2-hour shifts each. And I remember I told you to go get in the tent. I sat down, and that whole time I was sitting there writing in my logbook. And that whole night, my shift, I could hear movement around camp. I could hear like limbs being broke. I could hear something heavy moving through the leaves, and then I didn't pay no much attention to it. I thought it was just deer running around our camp. And then the owls started going, and I checked you out, and I said, "Are you awake?" And you said, "Yeah." And I said, "It's time for your shift." And then, not only that, go ahead and tell us about what happened on your shift. I remember as soon as I hit the sleeping bag, I was out.
Well, what really happened on my shift was I was just sitting there playing with that little dog that was at our base camp, and messing around with the dog and listening to the wind and the trees and all that. It wasn't until later into my shift that things started happening. I'd say probably around the last hour, 30 minutes or so. That's when things started happening. I was sitting down. I was ready to pass out, honestly. I was probably going to fall asleep in that chair if it wasn't for the fact that whenever I was spotlighting around, I caught a gleam, and then whenever it shined away, I saw two beady red eyes standing about 10 feet tall.
Now, was that the first or second night you're talking about?
That was the second night.
Well, tell us about that, leading up to it, when it happened, and right afterwards. What was going through your head whenever you saw what you saw? And to the viewers, I was passed out. I did not know what was going on, and he didn't tell me nothing about this till the next morning. So, go ahead, Kyle.
Yeah. Well, what happened was you had told me right before you went to bed, if I saw or heard anything to write it down in the logbook. Well, I was writing it down, and whenever I was trying to pay attention to it because my heart was beating fast and I was getting scared, didn't know what to do. And my first initial reaction was, get the fuck in the tent and go to bed.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's exactly what I did. I went to bed, woke up, and then I relayed my story to you the next morning.
I remember sitting there at the house and reading the logbook and reading down what you wrote whenever I was filling out my final report. And I remember finding those breaks right there at the north edge of camp, and that wasn't even 30 yards away from the tents.
Yeah.
Because you and me were right there in a little clearing that we'd pushed out with the bulldozer about maybe 10 or 15 years prior. We had loggers come in and clear out that area for grazing for our cattle. And there was fresh breaks that had been made within a 12-hour period.
Yeah. Some crazy stuff.
And then I remember telling you about this, and this was the first time that I told you whenever I asked you to come on the show. And it was about 4 o'clock, and the same morning that you went and had your encounter, and it was probably about a couple hours later, I was sitting there in bed in the tent asleep, and I felt my tent start to shift a little bit, and I thought it was just the wind. I rolled over, and then it come up off the ground on one side. And I'm sitting there thinking, if he's out here screwing around with me, I'm going to get out of this tent and I'm going to whoop his butt.
Yeah. No, I'm pretty sure either I had just got done with my shift, or I was already in bed.
Well, it was 4 o'clock in the morning and your shift ended at midnight.
All right, yeah, then I was already in bed, so it wasn't me.
And I remember going and saying, Kyle, quit. And I didn't hear no response. It just kept going on. It quit right after I said, Kyle, quit. And then I thought it was Sally, the dog that was brushing up against my tent, rocking my tent. And I said, Sally, go back to bed. Because usually she'd sleep out there next to the fire ring.
Yeah.
And then I couldn't hear Sally at all, and I heard like Sally whine and take off. Well, then my tent started to shift real bad. And it was so bad that it was rolling me over inside the tent. And what happened was I've rolled over and I'm reaching for my knife because I'm thinking somebody's here on the property that knows we're here screwing around, or there's something trying to get in the tent. And at this point, folks, I didn't know nothing about what Kyle just said. And I was oblivious to the whole thing. And then about 4 o'clock, and I'm feeling around, and I felt something stiff hitting my boot, and I felt like a leg, and I just kicked right through the side of the tent, and I heard, "Rah!" And all of a sudden, I just heard heavy footsteps taking off, and I heard stuff start breaking. Right then is whenever I think those breaks was occurring.
believe it.
And I remember waking up that next morning. You're sitting across from me, and I looked over and I said, "What's the matter with you?" And you told me what happened. And then I looked up, and you pointed to where you saw the eyes. And I took a tape measure, and I remember you and me ran that tape measure up that tree to the point where you saw them eyes. And I said, "That's about 8 foot up."
Yeah.
And you thought it was an owl, and then we looked there, and there was no branch there where the owl could have roosted on that side of that tree, because the branches were probably about maybe another 5 foot up.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, what was the emotions you were going through? I mean, would you say that you saw a squatch? Did you see something else? Or do you firmly believe that you saw a squatch in camp?
I do not know what I saw. I believe it could be a Sasquatch, but I'd like to believe it was something else.
Because the way it registers with me, because here in Southern Illinois, we don't have black bear in our area.
No, we don't.
And even the game wardens will tell you we don't have black bear in this part of Southern Illinois. They're all going to be down around Golconda and Elizabethtown and Carroll.
Yeah.
And then up past Decatur is where all the rest of the bear would be. So right here in our little belt of Southern Illinois, we don't have bear. And so I remember we got back to the house, and I read over your report, and I mean, if so much happened that night, I mean, like, so much happened that expedition that I'm still remembering to this day. I mean, we found the print, we found the hair, and I remember that time that remember whenever you and me took 5 and we shut all our lamps off, we could hear stuff moving around us, and Sally was right there with us.
Yep.
And something was just moving around us in the dark. And then I remember whenever we threw our lights on, everything just quit.
As soon as we turned the lights on, yep.
And then you remember we found that fence there on the edge of the property that we crossed, that it was just completely mowed over.
Oh, yeah. I forgot about that.
Yeah, I remember that clear as day, because that fence, I mean, it was old and everything, but the posts were fairly good condition. Those things were just snapped. In like, what, 2 or 3 places?
Yeah.
And then not only that, the steel posts for the fence posts were just bent over like you would a pipe cleaner.
Yeah.
And you and me know there's no man around here that strong enough to go and bend a perfectly good fence post over like that.
No, there's no way. It had to be something big.
But anything else that you took away from our expedition, Kyle, that you'd care to share with everybody? Go into detail. Don't leave out anything.
If anything, I'd just like to say, it was a fun experience. I really liked it. I got to learn a lot of things. And being able to, witness that type of stuff really gets you going. Really helps, like, pull that veil off your eyes, and so you can see what's really going on.
Right. And you'll agree with me that whenever you do see these creatures, because I firmly believe that you saw a squatch there at the end of camp. I didn't see it with my own eyes. I ain't going to say you didn't see it, because I wasn't awake to see it. We got a question on the live chat, Kyle, for you. My buddy Kenneth Roberts asked, did you smell anything?
The only thing that was really I could smell was wet, like just the wet moisture on the ground, like fresh dirt. That was about it.
And whenever the creature come into camp, did you smell any kind of scent at all?
No. as soon as they started, or whatever started getting closer, I, bum rushed straight to the tent and tried to go to bed as fast as possible.
Yeah, I remember you trying to wake me up. I just told you to go to bed.
Yeah, I was getting kind of spooked, so I just put my happy ass right in bed and went to there.
We got another question. Haley McKibben, she says, Kyle, were you scared at all?
Oh yeah, my heart was racing. I was definitely scared.
Describe it. Describe the fear that went through you. It feels like you were gonna felt like you was gonna be harmed at all? Do you feel like it was being observant of you or what?
At first, whatever I saw it was just standing in the tree line. It was just like it was taken in. It was like me being a deer in the headlights, but it was for it as well.
It took you both by surprise, basically.
Yeah. Whatever I was looking at was also probably as afraid as I was of it. And whenever I started to move around, that's whenever it started to move around.
Like it was mimicking you?
Yeah.
That's not the first time I've heard something like that, where a squatch would mimic a person's body language and all.
So, whenever I tried to wake you up and he told me to go to bed, and I turn around and I see the eyes are closer, I freaked out and got inside the tent and went, basically, I was so tired and scared that I basically just went straight to bed.
What now? You say you saw the light, the reflection in the eyes. What color was the reflection?
Whenever I shined the light over it, it was like a blinding white at first, but then whenever I took it off, they were just two big old beady red eyes.
And that was just the light from the campfire, or what?
No, that was me shining the light.
Oh wow! Which spotlight did you hit it with? Did you hit it with the one you brought, one of my spotlights, or a headlamp?
No, I hit it with the one that I brought.
That was a pretty bright light, especially. And did you see the face at all, or any kind of like this definitive features to the face?
No, not at that time.
It was just peeking at the top of its head around the tree then.
Yeah.
But have you had any kind of like, what else have you found in research that you've done since that has made you like even more a firm believer, if not at all?
Well, everything that I've looked up is from everybody's different accounts of what they've seen. And I've watched videos and things like that of what people have thought of either to be a Sasquatch or something else. And, in all my research that I've done and the things that I've encountered, I probably would say that there's such thing as a Sasquatch out there.
And in your personal opinion, and this is just your opinion, what do you think a Bigfoot is? I mean, there's so much speculation to what a Bigfoot could be. Some say it's a relic hominid. Some say it's like a caveman. Some say it's interdimensional, where it can go in and out of portals and it can cloak. Some people say it's an ape, undiscovered primate. Where do you stand in all this?
Well, from the evidence that we found, I believe that it could be some type of, I would say probably more into the primate deal, because it had fur, because we found hair samples. So it probably is some type of hairy animal or primate, because from the things that we saw, it had to be tall and it had to have strength and big feet and things like that. So, and they were pretty identical feet to what we have. So I'd say it's probably close to a human, if not either de-evolved or higher evolution.
And I mean, especially, I mean, I do thank you. I thank you 100 times for coming out for that expedition. I mean, you helped me a tremendous deal. But we left out the next morning after all this stuff went down the last night at camp. What was in our drive out of there? I mean, we took a 1020 John Deere with a flatbed trailer with all of our gear on it. What did you come away with on that as we were going out of Sasquatch Hollow and cutting up that hill and getting back on the road going back to the house? What did you take away from all this? What all went through your head?
To be completely honest with you, I was kind of glad to get out of there. And ready to, get back to civilization. It's not like that we were that far away from anything. It's just us being isolated out there by ourselves. I think that's what did it the most. And whenever I was leaving, it's like I was happy to be gone, but I was also sad at the same time because I really wanted to stay and investigate more.
Mm-hmm. And of course, you were still young at the time. You were about, what, 15, 16 years old when all this happened?
Yeah, I was probably 16.
And I mean, so far you're the only person that I've had out in that research area other than my team. But you've walked away out of everybody else on the team, besides myself, have walked out with an encounter in my research area. So, what would you say? Would you say that Bigfoot would still be there? Do you think they would have migrated out? Because I mean, I've had encounters in that area afterwards, and but what do you think? You gonna come back out for more?
Well, I mean, I'd definitely love to come back out for more, that seems like a definitely hot spot area for Sasquatch activity. Is from the things that we found, there's definitely something out there. I don't think that they would have migrated because, that was probably their home before it was our home. But you never can tell because, you got things moving all the time. They may have moved on to a different place. And then also something else could have moved in if they moved out. So,
Right. But well, I do appreciate you coming on the show. I know this is a short episode and everything, but we did cover a whole lot. But one question: if there's any kind of wisdom you would leave out there for even seasoned researchers or young up and coming researchers, what shred of wisdom would you leave them with?
Well, to be completely honest with you, I went into that research thinking of it as a joke. And whenever I came out, I was definitely changed. I would strongly suggest to take it seriously and be more in depth and, willing to agree with what you saw, because whenever I was there and I had my experiences, that is exactly what I did. I didn't try to play it off as something else. I just believed what it probably was.
And also, I want to throw this out there to the viewers that's listening. Kyle here will be helping me. He said he'd help me lead the third annual Bigfoot camp out this year, sometime in the fall. He also is planning on coming with me to Virginia for the ECBRO conference. You guys can get a chance to meet him. He may be going with me down to the LBL camp out with Stacy Black in Kentucky in April. And then, if I can get you to go, I'm going to be speaking down at Crypticon in Harlan, Kentucky at the end of April. So if you want to come along, you're more than welcome to.
It sounds like an experience that I would definitely take in hand.
Well, before we get off here, if there's anybody in your area of Illinois that has an encounter and they would like to contact you and share their encounter with you or their report, how can they get a hold of you?
You could probably get a hold of me on Facebook. You know, send me a friend request or send me a message or something. I always look, and I always like to accept and talk to people, things like that. So if anybody ever has any questions or whatnot, you know, you can always shoot me a message on Facebook.
I do appreciate you coming on the show, cousin. I'll see you soon, okay?
All right.
Well, I do appreciate you coming on the show. I hope you had a great time, buddy.
All right. Yes, and I did.
All right, Kyle, I'll talk to you later, buddy. I love you.
Love you too, man.
All right, bye-bye. And that does it for another episode of Backwoods Investigations with Blimp. I do appreciate everybody tuning in tonight and on the live chat. If you guys want to contact Kyle, look him up under Kyle Nation. His profile picture is of a rebel flag. You'll see he's a mutual friend with me. I'm pretty sure he would like to talk to you. Until then, I'll see you guys soon. Be sure to tune in next time to my next guest here on Backwoods Investigations. I do appreciate everybody tuning in, and I'll see you guys soon. This is Blimp saying keep a wary eye out, keep your ears in the wind, and your nose on the ground. Thanks for watching, my friends. Talk to you later.